go.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce to you John Llewellyn. Good morning, John.
Good morning.
John, today I'd like you to tell us about Hill versus Allred.
It's a lawsuit, but what it involves is the theft of $1.54 million from a lady named Virginia Hill. The defendants were Owen Allred, the leader of Apostolic United Brethren, J. Lemoyne Jensen, who is the current leader of the Apostolic United Brethren. Apostolic United Brethren as an entity was also a defendant. Jensen Lumber, the lumber company of Lemoyne Jensen, was a defendant. John Putphin and a Dennis Matthews, who were the two men that actually took possession of the money and took it to Owen Allred. Virginia was divorcing her husband in Detroit. They were wealthy. He was a professional gambler, and she converted all of her assets to cash and sent it, some of it UPS and some of it she was transported by vehicle, and she brought it herself to her mother and uncle who lived in St. George, Utah. As it happened, her mother and her uncle were members of a small fundamentalist group in the making, headed by a man named John Sugar. Sugar talked Virginia into buying a ranch, and she was going to pay cash for it. She had accumulated $3.5 million in cash, and this John Sugar impressed her as a honest ecclesiastical member, and he was keeping all of that money in trust as she traveled back and forth to Detroit. Sugar had been a bishop and a member in good standing with Apostolic United Brethren. He and Owen Allred tried to purchase the Deseret Inn Ranch, which was the Las Vegas mob's recreational ranch in St. George, just outside of St. George, Utah, in a beautiful location. But he couldn't purchase the ranch himself because it had failed. There was a dispute between Owen and Sugar. They both lost quite a bit of money and became bitter enemies over this failed purchase. But Sugar was obsessed with getting this ranch. But he couldn't purchase the ranch himself because he was on the outs with Herb Fletcher, the owner. So he enlisted the help of who he thought was a soulmate, a man by the name of Dennis Matthews, who was still a part of Apostolic United Brethren in good standing and somewhat of a confidant to Owen Allred. The purchase price was $1.5 million. Dennis Matthews said that it was just too much of a deal for him to handle. He just didn't have the expertise, so he wanted to bring in a good friend of his by the name of John Putphin, who was a realtor. But what he didn't tell John Sugar and Virginia is that John Putphin had had his license revoked because of unlawful activities he engaged in while a realtor. They took possession of $1 million. They sealed it in food storage gallon cans to transport it to Salt Lake. The two men were together. Now, instead of purchasing the ranch or going about the mechanics of the purchase, they went directly to Owen Allred, who was their spiritual leader. Now, in those days, Owen Allred had the habit of tape recording all important priesthood meetings, and this was considered an important priesthood meeting. So, in the meeting, Matthews and Putphin told him that a wealthy woman who wanted to repent for who knows what had donated a large sum of money to John Sugar, and John Sugar wanted Dennis to purchase the DI ranch, and they said that if he had this money and was able to purchase the DI ranch, he would be in a position to do a lot of harm to the AUB people. Well, these guys knew that Owen and Sugart were bitter enemies. So they asked him if he wouldn't inquire of the Lord to see what they should do with this money. Should they go ahead and purchase the ranch as they agreed to? Should they keep the money? Should they give it back? Just what should they do? Well, there's a little hesitation on the tape recording, and Owen came back and said, we won't give the money back. We'll purchase the ranch for ourselves, and then we will pay off the Granite Ranch. Well, he says we won't tell anyone because we're polygamists. Well, right after that, Owen ordained Dennis a bishop, making him an overseer of the money. At that time, the money was in Dennis's basement in his house. It was then transferred to Owen, who took possession of it and put it in the closet of his one of his plural wives, which was adjacent to his office. After about 3 months, when they didn't hear from these guys, Virginia naturally panicked. And so she got Sugart. She says, we've got to find Dennis and Putnam. So they came to Salt Lake City. They found Dennis Matthews. And Dennis was able to convince them that John Putnam had run off with the money and he had taken every cent. One of the words I quoted from Dennis saying is that he did not get 1 red cent. Well, within 2 weeks after they took possession of the first $1 million and Dennis was ordained a bishop, Dennis went back down to St. George with the plural wife, who I interviewed later. She had left him, and obtained the $500,000 for the final purchase. He was driving a brand new Lexus automobile that was purchased with Virginia's money. It was interesting. Sugart's wife, Dolly, asked Dennis, she says, what are you doing, Dennis, buying cars with our money? And Dennis just laughed it off. Now, she said our money, as if it was hers and Sugart's as well as Virginia's. And this is a symptom of the entitlement that these fundamentalists have. Sugart was had taken the position that that money should be his and that he should decide how it should be spent. In fact, Virginia found out later that he was going to embezzle all of that money from her. I mean, he was no different than Owen and the rest of them in reality, but of course he pretended to be this honest, compassionate, religious leader. She and Sugart and her uncle Danny Jackson went to Salt Lake, and after talking with Dennis Matthews, they decided that they would go see Owen Allred and ask for his help in locating John Putnam. Ogden crowd who arranged for the meeting. It was a little bit tense because of the differences between Owen and Sugart. But at that time, Sugart told Owen that the money belonged to Virginia. See, up until then, he was thinking that she had donated it to Sugart. She had not. So Owen at that time had the power, had he wanted to give the money back to her, and it would have avoided all of this embarrassment and the theft and the conspiracies and all of the stuff that went with it. But he didn't. What Virginia didn't realize is that not 20 feet away, her money was sitting in his wife Vera's closet in an apple box, a cardboard box. When I first interviewed Owen, he claimed that he didn't know anything about Virginia's money or Putnam or the theft or anything. And Putnam, after he got possession of the money, went to New Zealand and stayed there until after he thought the statute of limitations expired. But in the meantime, and up and before, Virginia had gone there to talk to Owen. In fact, while this was going on, they were laundering money into AUB. And Putnam, who was the brains of this criminal conspiracy, had opened up several shell corporations to transfer the money through. One of the corporations was Diamond Automotive Specialties. It was the owner of a used car lot. They planned to buy cars and sell them and make some money. In the Articles of Incorporation, Lemoyne Jensen was a director of that corporation. They enlisted the help of a man named Jeff Norman and his wife Sarah to launder the money, and they opened up several accounts under the name of Last Resort Enterprises, and that's where all the money went to initially. From Last Resort Enterprises, the money was to go to Diamond Automotive Specialties, and from there it was going to Lemoyne Jensen, who was listed in the documents as the sole trustee of Apostolic United Brethren. And all of this laundering was to go on in $2,500 increments. Well, Jeff Norman and his wife, I mean, in a matter of days laundered many thousands of dollars into these different branch banks, and the banks, noticing this, notified the sheriff's office and the IRS, and an investigation ensued. Well, after I think it was 5 or 7 payments to Lemoyne Jensen as the trustee of AUB, they found out that there was an investigation going on, and they panicked. Lemoyne had his name taken off of the Articles of Incorporation of Last Resort Enterprises, and Owen gave the money to Putnam. So Putnam had the money. Well, Jeff Norman was arrested, but Putnam helped the investigators in this way. Jeff Norman had an oil security scam going, and they had what they called a boiler room, where several people were making phone calls trying to initial people to invest in this oil exploration business. And he helped the authorities raid that oil securities boiler room. Jeff got a good attorney, a good defense attorney, and they made a deal with the federal prosecutors that he would plead guilty to structuring, which was a form of money laundering, if they would dismiss on the oil securities scams and dismiss on his wife Sarah. So he pled guilty thinking that he would get probation, but part of the deal was that he had to tell everything about what happened, who was involved in the money laundering, where the money come from, and all that sort of thing. But the story he stuck to was that Putnam was a mafia guy and had threatened to harm his family if he didn't launder the money. Well, they knew that wasn't true. So what actually Jeff Norman was doing was keeping it quiet about Owen and Lemoyne's involvement in all this. Well, he wound up serving 2 years in federal prison. While he was gone, AUB, Owen made sure that his family was still well taken care of. And after he got out, he was made a partner in a construction firm. I had a partner named Rod Williams who was with the Border Patrol, and he's the one who initially got me involved in the investigation. And Putnam, while he was in New Zealand, was calling Rod and furnishing little bits of information. And he told Rod that if he would cooperate with him and give him a certain affidavit, which Rod did, Putnam said that he would give him evidence to show that that Owen Allred was actually involved in the theft of that money. Of course, he was thinking the statute of limitations was over, and it wasn't until after he thought the statute was over that he sent the tape recording to Rod. Well, all the time that they were having these conversations, I had given Rod a tape recorder with a device to record the conversations. So we were accumulating an awful lot of information. And
I'd like to ask about the original tape recording, the one that actually was made during the transition of the money.
Okay, during that initial meeting with...
Yes.
Okay.
Tell us about
All
that
right.
tape.
Well, I essentially have, and the substance of the tape was Owen, after consulting with the Lord, said that they were going to keep the money for themselves, and they were going to purchase the DI ranch and pay off the Granite Ranch.
So that was all on tape, and that's
all
the
on
tape
tape
that they're referring to in the court documents.
Oh yeah, it's part of the court record. In fact, I had it transcribed and certified, and it is also part of the court record. So anybody that wants to, it's public information, they can go down and obtain that transcript with the word-to-word verbalizations of what transpired in that meeting.
So Owen actually tape recorded the theft, and that was the tape that actually found him guilty in the case.
Well, that was part of it. He also, what he did, after he got the tape recording, I went back and interviewed Owen, and I said, Owen, you told me that you didn't know anything about this money, but I have a tape recording here that says you knew everything about what happened to that money. And I have to hand it to him. He held his demeanor pretty well, but what he did is he went and got Dennis Matthews, had him come to his office there, but we made a copy of it, and I played that copy for the two of them, see what the reactions were. Well, after Dennis had left, Owen told me, he says, you know, two men had come to me, and they had this cardboard box full of money, gobs and gobs of money. And he showed me right the closet, pointed to the floor, and says it sat right there for the longest time. And I said, well, who were those men? Well, darned if I can remember. He says, I just can't remember. I said, well, how much money was in that box? And he says, I don't know, I didn't count it, but there were gobs and gobs of money. He says, and then I told him, get it out, get it out, get it out. What he was trying to do was convince me that he was innocent and was a victim of all this.
I think it's important that we let our listening audience know that when Virginia went to ask Owen Allred about the money, and he said he knew nothing about the money or where the men were, it was actually about 20 feet from where they were talking in that closet.
That's right.
At that time, and he knew it.
Sure, he knew it, and he also knew where Putnam could be found. I mean, they were in the process of laundering the money and making these different purchases, cars, used car lot, and the whole works. And like I said before, he was in a position then to make things right with her, but he didn't. The next day, after she'd gone back to St. George, he called her on the telephone and assured her that neither him or Dennis had anything to do with the loss of her money. But when Putnam went to New Zealand, the clock stopped. When he came back, the clock started up again. So we was able to keep him in. But the district court said all the other defendants, the statute had expired and dismissed on them all, except for Putnam. Well, we needed to get all of those others in. And so it went to the Utah Supreme Court. And the statute doesn't start until the victim of the crime finds out who the perpetrators were. She didn't find out until 1995 when Rod and I told her, after we had accumulated a certain amount of information. And I was still trying to find some more evidence. And I was up at Ann Wild's house, who was the plural wife of Ogden Crowd, and I was friendly with them. And she introduced me to Tom Green, the infamous polygamist that was on all the television shows and everything. And he told me that he lived out in Snake Valley, which is where the Granite Ranch was located. And Rod and I had already determined that they had paid off the ranch 5 days after taking possession of the first $1 million. But because we couldn't show that actual money from Virginia went to pay off the Granite Ranch, the judge dismissed. But what's interesting is the Granite Ranch, the people thought the Granite Ranch was part of AUB. It wasn't. It was registered under Red Cedar Corporation, and the owners of Red Cedar Corporation were Glenn Allred, who was Owen's favorite son, Owen Allred, and J. Lemoyne Jensen. They're the ones who owned the ranch. But they had people donating money towards the ranch, building it up, because it was supposed to be a place of refuge. It just shows you more deception and that goes on in Apostolic United Brethren. But when Putphin set up this laundering scheme of the $500,000 into AUB, and in it, it showed the money coming from last resort to assignment to the used car lot, Diamond Automotive Specialties, and then to Lemoyne Jensen, the sole trustee of Apostolic United Brethren. And that's how I come up with the 2 assignment of trust deeds. They were the frosting on the cake. Between that and the tape recordings, I mean, that was, the whole case was built around that tape recording and those documents, and of course the phony corporations which I was able to find.
So Lemoyne had his name on the Diamond Auto as well, right in the beginning.
Right, right. His signature was there and everything. This whole thing, the whole laundering business, was an AUB operation. They were accused of a criminal conspiracy, and under the RICO Act, which would have doubled the damages. So there was a lot at stake. That meant they had to go back to the Utah Supreme Court again. The Supreme Court rightly ruled that yes, there was 2 assignment of trust deeds, and yes, there was a criminal conspiracy. Right in their ruling, it says that defendants engaged in a pattern of criminal activity. That's organized crime. Anyway, it went back to the district judge, and we come up with a $6.5 million judgment.
So a $6.5 million judgment. And how in the world did you find a way to make them actually start paying back? Just because you had the judgment, I know it's hard to get the money. What did you do?
That's right. That's right. If they don't have the money, then you can't get it. Okay. So I found all of their property and found out that Jensen Lumber was free and clear and was worth well over a couple of $1 million. And where their endowment house was, where they do endowments and different rituals, and their meeting house in Bluffdale, it was free and clear, along with some other people. And anyway, the total value exceeded $6.5 million. I put liens on all of that property in behalf of Virginia Hill. So there was the inducement, and what they were telling these people, the feedback that we got out of AUB, is that you're going to lose your homes, your property, we're going to lose our temple, our meeting house, everything, unless you come up with money to help pay off this judgment. And the word that I got from reliable sources, that people were mortgaging properties, selling off ATVs, whatever they could to raise the money. Owen had died in the process. There wasn't any checks that came from his estate. They claimed his estate was bankrupt. The estate did. I didn't see any checks come from Jensen Lumber. I don't know that Owen Allred, and I know Matthews never paid a dime towards the settlement. It all came from AUB, which means it came from the members of AUB.
Which means they fleeced their own sheep, which means they stole it twice.
I talked with some that made inquiries. They didn't all fall for it, but enough of them did. You know, they've got something like 7,000 members, and they come up with the money.
Right. To clarify a point, Owen Allred was the leader of the AUB at the time that this took place, and Lemoyne Jensen is the current leader of the AUB. Is that not correct?
That's true. the people had all of this evidence to show that their leaders were dishonest, crooks. And I thought, gee, there would be a wholesale exodus from AUB, but there was only a handful of people that left. Some mental acrobatics, I guess you could call it, called cognitive dissonance, where to recognize and admit the truth of something would be more traumatic than to make up excuses for their criminal behavior, as in this case. And see, Owen and Lemoyne were supposed to be appointed by God. They are surrogate gods, actually surrogate gods. You know, so in order to keep the people's investment into AUB, which is a way of life, then Owen said that she had actually donated the money and then had reneged. Well,
that's the story. That's the story I think most of us chose to believe.
Right.
Because in looking at reality, accepting reality requires accepting a logical behavior pattern.
And the consequences from that.
Right.
You know, and the consequences were just too terrible for them to do, because, you know, these people had built houses on priesthood property. They had invested, their whole lives revolved around the authority of the priesthood and their prophet. And, you know, to start over would just be too traumatic.